You know what's wild? There's this person out there who's sitting on $6,000 right now, $4,000 away from their first 10,000, and they're terrified. Not because they don't know what to do. They know exactly what to do. Save more, invest more, stay consistent. But there's this psychological barrier sitting right in front of them that feels impossible to cross. Meanwhile, there's someone else who casually mentions they were trying to save $10,000 and accidentally saved $22,000. Same skill set, same market, same basic tools, but a completely different internal experience. We need to talk about why that happens because understanding this changes everything about how you build wealth. I spend way too much time thinking about the psychology of money, the weird mental barriers that stop people from progressing, and why certain milestones feel impossibly hard even when the math says they shouldn't be. If you're someone who's trying to build real wealth without getting stuck in your own head, subscribe and like this video. By the end of this video, you'll understand the exact psychological shift that makes $10,000 feel harder than $1,000, why your brain is lying to you about difficulty, and how to rewire your thinking so the next milestone feels inevitable instead of impossible. To see why this matters, we have to start with a truth that nobody wants to hear. The hardest part about money isn't the money, it's you. Look, here's the thing. When you're going from $0 to $1,000 saved, it feels hard, but it also feels achievable. You can visualize it. $1,000 is a real thing. You can see it in your mind. You know what $1,000 looks like. You know how it feels to hold a stack of 20s. You've spent $1,000 before on rent, on a car repair, on a vacation. So saving it doesn't feel abstract. It feels like a concrete goal with a finish line you can see. But $10,000, that's different. That number lives in a different part of your brain. It's not something you've casually held in your hand. It's not something you've spent on an impulse. It's a number that feels theoretical. And here's what happens. Your brain starts treating it like an impossible task instead of just a bigger version of the same task. You've already proven you can save $1,000. You've done it. So logically, $10,000 is just doing that same thing 10 times, but it doesn't feel that way, does it? It feels like a completely different category of challenge. And that's the illusion. That's the trap. Your brain is confusing scale with difficulty. Let me show you what I mean. Imagine you're trying to run a mile. If you've never run before, a mile feels hard. Your lungs burn, your legs hurt, you're thinking about quitting halfway through. But if you stick with it and you train, eventually a mile becomes easy. You can do it without thinking. Now, someone tells you to run 10 miles. Your brain doesn't say, oh, that's just a mile 10 times. Your brain says, that's a marathon, that's impossible, that's for other people. But here's the truth. 10 miles is just a mile 10 times. It's the same motion, the same mechanics, the same fundamental action repeated. The only difference is time and consistency. And once you realize that, the 10 miles stops being scary. It starts being obvious. That's the exact shift you need to make with money. $10,000 isn't a different skill than $1,000. It's the same skill repeated, same habits, same decisions, same discipline, just for longer. But your brain fights you on this because your brain is wired to see big numbers as threats. Big numbers trigger fear. And fear makes you freeze. So instead of taking action, you start overthinking. You start researching. You start looking for shortcuts. You convince yourself that the way you got to 1,000 won't work for 10,000. You need a side hustle. You need to invest differently. You need some new strategy. And that's where people get stuck. They abandon the thing that was already working because it feels too slow for the bigger goal. But slow doesn't mean broken. Slow means it's working exactly the way it's supposed to. Here's a story that illustrates this perfectly. I know someone who saved their first $1,000 in about 4 months. Nothing fancy. Just cutting back on eating out, skipping a few subscriptions, putting $50 a week into a savings account. It felt good. They felt accomplished. Then they decided they wanted to save $10,000. And suddenly, the same strategy felt inadequate. $50 a week felt like nothing against a $10,000 goal. So they started looking for bigger moves. They thought about starting a business, they looked into trading stocks, they researched real estate investing, and you know what happened? They stopped saving because they were so busy looking for the shortcut that they stopped doing the thing that was already working. A year later, they had less than $2,000 saved. If they just kept putting $50 a week away, they'd have had over $2,500 plus whatever they already had. But the illusion of difficulty made them abandon the process. This happens constantly. People get to a certain level, and instead of trusting the process that got them there, they convince themselves they need a new process. But the process doesn't change. The timeline changes, the numbers change, the process stays the same. Save more than you spend. Do it consistently. Let time do the heavy lifting. Now, let's talk about why $10,000 specifically feels so much harder than $1,000. There's this thing in psychology called logarithmic perception. Basically, your brain doesn't perceive numbers linearly, it perceives them logarithmically. The difference between $100 and $200 feels huge. You can feel that difference in your daily life. But the difference between $10,100 and $10,200, that feels like nothing. Same $100 gap, but your brain treats it completely differently. This is why going from 0 to 1,000 feels like a massive achievement. But going from 9,000 to 10,000 feels slow and frustrating even though you're doing the exact same thing. Your brain is calibrated to notice small changes when the numbers are small, and to ignore small changes when the numbers are big. And that screws with your motivation because every $100 you save early on feels like massive progress. But every $100 you save later feels insignificant. You're working just as hard. You're making just as much progress, but it doesn't feel that way. And when progress doesn't feel good, people quit. Here's the fix. You have to reframe how you measure progress. Instead of focusing on the absolute number, focus on the percentage. If you've got $1,000 saved and you add another 100, that's 10% growth. If you've got 9,000 saved and you add another 100, that's only about 1% growth. Your brain sees that and thinks you're slowing down, but you're not slowing down. You're just measuring wrong. The real metric isn't how much you added, it's whether you're still adding. Because the person who keeps adding $100 a month when they're at 9,000 is the same person who added $100 a month when they were at 1,000. The behavior didn't change. The results didn't change. The only thing that changed is the context. And if you let the context mess with your head, you'll stop right before the finish line. That's what happens to most people. They get 70% of the way to a goal, the progress slows down emotionally, and they give up. Not because it got harder, but because it stopped feeling as rewarding. Let me tell you what actually separates people who hit 10,000 from people who get stuck at 3 or 4,000. It's not income. I've seen people making 40,000 a year save $10,000. I've seen people making 120,000 a year struggle to save 3,000. The difference isn't how much you make, it's how you think about the goal. The people who hit 10,000 treat it like it's inevitable. They don't question whether it's going to happen, they just assume it will. And because they assume it will, they don't get distracted. They don't look for shortcuts. They don't get impatient. They just keep doing the thing, $50 a week, $100 a paycheck, whatever the number is, they hit it every time. No drama, no excuses. And then one day they check the balance and it's $10,000. And they're almost surprised because it didn't feel hard. It just felt consistent. That's the secret. Consistency doesn't feel impressive while you're doing it. It feels boring. Yes, it feels insignificant, but boring and insignificant actions repeated over time create results that look impossible to people who don't understand the process. Now, there's another layer to this. The psychological weight of $10,000 is different because $10,000 represents something bigger than just money. When you're at $1,000, you've got a small emergency fund. When you're at $10,000, you've got options. You've got enough to weather a serious crisis. You've got enough to make a life change. You've got enough to feel like you're not one bad month away from disaster. And your brain knows this. Your brain knows that $10,000 is the threshold where money starts working differently. It's the threshold where you stop living paycheck to paycheck and start living with margin. And because the stakes feel higher, your brain adds pressure. You start thinking about all the ways you could mess it up. You start worrying about the market crashing. You start second guessing your investments. You start feeling like the closer you get, the more you have to lose. And that mental pressure makes the process harder, even though the mechanics haven't changed. You're still saving the same way. You're still investing the same way. But now you're doing it with a knot in your stomach because the goal feels real enough to fail at. Here's how to beat that. You treat $10,000 like it's not special. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but hear me out. The moment you treat $10,000 like it's some magical finish line, you give it power over you. You make it bigger than it is, and that makes you fragile. But if you treat $10,000 like it's just a milestone on the way to 50,000 or 100,000 or whatever your real goal is, then it stops being scary. It's just a marker. It's just proof that the system works. And once you hit it, you keep going because the process that got you to 10,000 is the same process that'll get you to 50,000. You don't need to reinvent anything. You just need to not quit. That's the whole game. Don't quit. Don't get distracted. Don't convince yourself you need a new strategy every time the number gets bigger. The strategy is the strategy. Save more than you spend. Invest the difference. Let compound interest do the work. Repeat. You don't need to reinvent anything. You just need to not quit. That's the whole game. Don't quit. Don't get distracted. Don't convince yourself you need a new strategy every time the number gets bigger. The strategy is the strategy. Save more than you spend. Invest the difference. Let compound interest do the work. Repeat. Let me give you a practical example of how this plays out in real life. There's someone who started with $400, literally $400. They were starting from almost zero, and they made a plan. Save $150 a month. Not aggressive, not extreme, just consistent. First month, they hit it. 400 turned into 550. Second month, they hit it again. 550 turned into 700. By month 6, they had $1,300, and something clicked. They realized the process worked, so they didn't change anything. They just kept going. Month 12, they had $2,500. Month 24, they had $5,200. And somewhere around month 30, they crossed $10,000. And when I talked to them about it, they said the weirdest thing. They said it felt easier after the first few months. Not because the numbers got bigger, but because the routine became automatic. They stopped thinking about it. It just happened. Just every paycheck, $150 moved. They didn't negotiate with themselves. They didn't make exceptions. It was just part of the system. Like paying rent, like paying the electric bill. It wasn't optional. It was just what they did. And that's the mindset shift. When saving becomes non-negotiable, it stops being hard. It's only hard when you treat it like a choice, because every time you treat it like a choice, you have to use willpower, and willpower runs out. But systems don't run out. Systems just run. Here's what nobody tells you. The difference between people who save $10,000 and people who don't isn't talent. It's not income. It's not luck. It's whether they built a system or whether they relied on motivation. Motivation is great for getting started. Motivation gets you excited. Motivation makes you feel like you can do anything. But motivation fades. You know this. You've felt it. You get pumped about a goal. You're on fire for 2 weeks, and then life happens. You get tired. You get busy. The excitement wears off. And if you're relying on motivation to keep you going, you stop. But if you build a system, the system doesn't care how you feel. The system runs whether you're motivated or not. And that's why systems beat motivation every single time. The people who hit $10,000 aren't more disciplined than you. They just automated the process so discipline wasn't required. They set up automatic transfers. They made saving the default. And because it was the default, it just happened. No willpower needed, no daily decision required. It just ran in the background while they lived their life. Now, let's talk about the people who accidentally saved more than they planned. The person who was trying to save 10,000 and accidentally saved 22,000. How does that happen? It happens because once the system is in place, it keeps running. And once you stop checking the balance every day, once you stop obsessing over the number, you start making progress faster than you expect because you're not bleeding motivation by constantly measuring. You're just letting time do the work. And time is shockingly effective when you don't interrupt it. Here's the thing. People don't understand about compound growth. It's not linear, it's exponential, which means it feels slow at the beginning and fast at the end. When you're saving your first $1,000, every $100 is 10% of your goal. When you're saving your $10,000, every $100 is 1%. But the compounding doesn't care about percentages, it cares about the absolute number. So as your base gets bigger, the same percentage return gives you bigger absolute gains, and eventually your money starts doing more work than you do. But you only get there if you don't quit during the slow part. Most people quit during the slow part. They save $1,000, they save $2,000, they save $3,000, and they think, this is taking forever. At this rate, I'll never hit my goals, so they stop. But if they just kept going, they would have hit the inflection point. The point where the momentum takes over, the point where it stops feeling hard and starts feeling inevitable, but they never get there because they quit too early. Here's a thought experiment for you. Imagine you're trying to push a boulder up a hill. At the beginning, it's brutal. You're straining, you're sweating. The boulder barely moves, but you keep pushing, and eventually you get it to the top of the hill. And once it's at the top, it doesn't take effort anymore. It just rolls. That's what saving feels like. The beginning is hard because you're building momentum from zero, but once you've got momentum, once you've got a few $1,000s saved, once the habits are locked in, it gets easier. Not because the numbers are smaller, but because you're not fighting inertia anymore. You're working with momentum instead of against it, and the people who get this are the people who win. They understand that the hardest part is the start, and they don't expect it to feel easy, they just expect it to work. And because they expect it to work, they don't quit when it feels slow. They trust the process. They trust that if they keep showing up, the results will show up too, and they're right. So, what do you actually do with this information? Let me give you 3 things that'll change how you approach $10,000 or any big financial goal. First, stop thinking about the goal as one big thing. Break it into smaller chunks. Instead of saying, I need to save $10,000, say, I need to save $1,000 10 times. That mental shift takes the pressure off because saving $1,000 feels doable. You've done it before. You can do it again. And once you've done it twice, you know you can do it 10 times. It's the same action, just repeated. Second, automate everything. If you're relying on yourself to manually transfer money every paycheck, you're going to fail eventually. Life will get busy. You'll forget. You'll make an exception, and exceptions turn into habits. But if the money moves automatically, you can't forget. You can't make an exception. It just happens. And once it's automatic, you stop thinking about it, which is exactly what you want, because the less you think about it, the less you'll sabotage yourself. Third, measure progress by behavior, not by balance. Don't obsess over the number in your account. Obsess over whether you hit your savings target this month. Did you save what you said you'd save? Yes or no? If yes, you won. The balance will catch up. But if you're constantly checking the balance and feeling disappointed because it's not growing fast enough, you'll lose motivation. And losing motivation is how you quit. So focus on the inputs, not the outputs. Focus on doing the thing. The results will follow. Here's what I want you to understand. $10,000 doesn't feel harder than $1,000 because it is harder. It feels harder because your brain treats it differently. But if you override that mental bias, if you treat $10,000 like it's just $1,000 repeated, the path becomes clear. You're not learning new skills. You're not discovering some secret strategy. You're just doing the same thing you've already proven you can do for longer. That's it. That's the whole game. And the reason most people don't get there isn't because they can't. It's because they stop. They stop because it feels slow. They stop because they get distracted. They stop because they convince themselves they need a better plan. But you don't need a better plan. You need to execute the plan you already have. And if you can do that, if you can just keep doing the boring, unglamorous work of saving consistently, you'll wake up one day and realize you're at $10,000 and it won't feel like you climbed a mountain. It'll feel like you just walked far enough. Because that's all it ever was. A long walk, not a sprint, not a miracle, just one step after another until you got there. And once you've done it once, you'll realize you can do it again. 20,000, 50,000, 100,000. The only thing that changes is how long you're willing to walk. And the people who build real wealth, they're the ones who are willing to walk as long as it takes because they know the destination isn't the point. The walk is the point. The habits are the point. The system is the point. And once you've got the system, the numbers take care of themselves. So stop overthinking it. Stop waiting for the perfect moment. Stop looking for the shortcut. Just start walking. And don't stop until you get there. If this video helped show it's not so hard to get to $10,000, check out my next video where I show you that $1,000 is enough to change your life.